I took a bus trip, Greyhound bus trip to Mexico and traveled all over. And I went and saw a lot of indigenous people weaving down in Chiapas and various different parts of Mexico. And that's what fascinated me. That's how I got my inspiration. I also traveled in Europe a lot, and so I had studied weaving in Scandinavia, learning a lot of technical things about weaving, but then I put them together with my experience with art. So I did a lot of research. Research doesn't always lead to something, but it often does eventually. I don't necessarily have a purpose when I start out. I'm just interested. So I'm following my interests. And then I bring that in together with my work. You know, there's just so much language that you can use with weaving. Many techniques and ideas that haven't been explored at all. There's just it's just a great range of techniques and processes and ways of developing imagery, which is special. So that's what I liked about the field. There was just a lot to play with. Early on, I entered the Biennial of Tapestry in Lausanne, Switzerland, which was a major exhibition in the world. That was a big starting point for me. Textiles as subject matter was a really important theme that eventually I moved to. And that had a lot to do with, you know, travels in Europe, seeing paintings that were all drapery, but they weren't the subject matter. And of course, it was a time here when there was a lot of feminist stuff going on. And so I liked the idea of making the textile itself as the subject matter. And that work, although woven, it was also painted and on linen or canvas, cut it into strips, wove it into a warp that I'd painted, and all of that went into water and ran through a big etching press. So there was lots and lots of process involved, and I think that's been very important. The photographic image was built from particles, you know. So, and back then, blew up a slide, you could see the dots, you know. And the way color was built from particles. And then how that connected to weaving, the threads, because the woven image or the woven is all built from individual threads going over and under and crossing. And so it's that making the photograph tactile was a really interesting thing. And one thing that people say is that sometimes look at my work, they look at it at a distance and think it's just a flat photograph, but when they get up close, then they have a different experience with it. You know, before we had computers, things were done with punch cards, and I had a loom, several looms that worked that way, and then. Because I like the idea of, I'm always interested in pattern. With weaving, you always get this pattern, but pattern that doesn't repeat. So it's pattern that's always changing. And so I was always playing around with this, the technical structure. What I found with the process myself is that I like the flexibility of it, so that I could just, you know, I could start to weave something, didn't like it or wanted to change something, go back to the computer. Within 15, 20 minutes, I could come back and change it. So it had it's the flexibility that the computer allowed. And also weave by hand. So I still really like using the hand to weave, and the touch of the hand on the fabric and all of that, which is a big part of my work. How this started is that I did a series of think it was 6 pieces. I was doing doll faces then. It was the same image, you know, it just translated differently textile wise. But people's responses were just, this one's sad, this one's happy, this one's angry, it just blew my mind that people could have such a different response to the same image, just translated slightly differently. And so I started building a piece. Eventually, it turned into a 32 piece. And then I kind of had enough. You know, by accident, I discovered this program that had just been out of Harvard for a couple of weeks or something. It just one place I was. And so I went and had my brain scanned, you know, and then I learned how to manipulate the program. And so, you know, then of course there were these fibers, you know, and it looked very much like a weaving. So I had to go with it. So again, it wasn't something that I intended at all. It was something that happened on the side. But it became, you know, a major part of the work. So they started then weaving those fibers in with the faces, and mostly with the image of the person it came from. And mostly it came from my brain. So I was trying not to weave a brain. That's what I say is, every time I would get together with one of these neuroscientists, they say, oh, you can weave a brain. I say, never, never, I'm never going to weave brains. And, you know, because I was interested in the emotion part, you know. Right now, I started working with the plant fibers from my garden and combining that with the neurological brain fibers and combining that with some of the imagery from the early work of the parallel lines. So I started just, you know, reimagining older work into newer work and experimenting with that. I was very lucky to have the mother that I had, which didn't want to make a 1950s woman out of me. She wanted me to have my own experiences and be free to explore things. And I think that I was very fortunate.